There is, a variety of perspectives on what kind of approaches or roadmaps or solutions we need to reach our vision. But the question that I'm asking today is, what kind of change work do we urgently need now, at this juncture, at this point in time? And there's a quote by Albert Einstein that's been guiding my thinking on this ever since I came across it. And it is, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them, right? So this sense that what got us into this mess or what got us to this point is not going to be what helps us get out of it. We need to find different approaches. We need to find different tools. And many people now are, calling for systems change. You've probably seen a sign like this, systems change, not climate change. It's debated, in academia, in political spaces. It's really a growing movement. But what does it actually mean? Like, if we really boil it down, what does systems change entail? What does it look like? And how could we contribute to it? That's the goal of what we are starting to discuss today. So before we can get into systems change, we need to understand, what do we actually mean when we say system? And I'm offering here a quote by Donella Meadows, that a system is an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something. And coherently here, because I've been challenged on this before, does not mean that it's the best way. It does not mean that it's a way that I would say is good necessarily, right? This is not normative. It's just that there is a principle of organizing. Whether it's good, bad, in between, that's a judgment that we can place on it from our normative point of view, but it's just that it's something that's organized. And this is important because, for example, if I look at the forest that's next to my home, that's a system, right? There is a relationship between the different parts. If something changes in the context, it will have a chain of consequences and ripple effects in the whole ecosystem. But if I throw, say, 3 stones on the floor, they don't have a super strong relationship amongst each others, right? There is no coherence or no principle of organizing amongst the 3 stones that I just threw on the floor. So there is some type of relationship, some type of organizing principle for achieving something. And again, this doesn't mean that we designed it, right? Like in nature, ecosystems and systems happen just because they happen. They have evolved in this way. So it's not necessarily a conscious design, but it is just something that has emerged and where we can tell what is the final result of it. So systems really exist at every scale, right? You could say the cell is a system, a certain organ is a system, your body is a system, but so is the Earth, galaxy, right? You can really zoom in or out. And our focus here today in this course in general, when we talk about systems change work as a field, it's on human systems. Why? Because in a way, all the social and environmental challenges we're facing are the consequences or the result of human decision making. So I'm not here to discuss, natural ecosystems or how should we tweak a cell to achieve something. What I'm here to discuss is, how do we address the human-made systems, the things we have created that are now creating the consequences, the results, the problems that we're facing. So this is a first key insight, that the first step to contributing to systems change is learning systems thinking. It is just a certain lens that we put on, a way of looking at the world that, if done properly, completely changes the way we operate. So you've already heard me talk about Donella Meadows. So the context here is that systems thinking in this kind of line of tradition or line of thought stemmed from the study of ecosystems in natural science, and specifically system modeling. And it is with system modeling that Donella Meadows and her co-authors put out the 1972 Limits to Growth report, right? So they modeled the trajectory of our economy, the trajectory of population growth, the trajectory of a bunch of things that are just on these exponential curves that I'm sure you've seen in the years since, and just kind of showing how this is not sustainable in the really narrow sense of the word, cannot be sustained on a finite planet. So they got to this conclusion through system modeling. And here's a book recommendation if you want to dive deeper. There's a book called Thinking in Systems, a primer that was actually put out after Donella Meadows sadly passed. And there is also a project called Donella Meadows Project, where they have a repository of her speeches and resources and so on that you can have a look at. So we are going to, talk about complexity theory, different social sciences as well. But for now, this is maybe the valuable context to give. So with that said, as a bit of context on systems thinking, on, why it matters, why we are here in the first place, and why we use these words, we are going to go into applying a systemic lens to the causes that you care about. So the key tool that we're going to use today to think more systemically, so to begin practicing systems thinking, is the Iceberg Model. I'm going to drop in the chat a link to the blog post where this model is explained in depth. So if at any point you want to revisit this, or if something that I'm saying is not clear and you want to have a look, you can refer to it. And I'm also going to drop the direct link to this template because we're going to be applying it together. So let's just go through it together. The first level above the waterline, when I look at anything, any system, any challenge, any cause I care about, is I can look at the behaviors, the decisions, the results, and all of these we call in systems thinking, outcomes, symptoms, right? So our understanding is that what is above the waterline is the result of what exists below the waterline. So when we go one level deeper, just below the waterline, what we find are the structures, the processes, the rules, the laws, the practices, the norms, and money flows that are key to a certain system. One level further below is the distribution and dynamics of power, the relationships, the implicit norms. So the question we can always ask ourselves is, who gets to decide, for example, the laws? Who gets to decide the processes and the structures? And then you usually find out who wields the power in that system. And at the deepest level, we can look at the mindset, the values, the beliefs that justify this way of acting. So we are looking for the paradigm, the worldview that one person needs to hold to think that this way of making rules, that this way of governing is justified and is right. We're going to get a lot more into that. But just to give you one example, when we look, for example, at plastic in the ocean, right? Like that's a problem, obviously. It's an outcome. You could say it's a symptom of a deeper problem. And just removing the plastic from the ocean is not going to solve the problem at the root, right? Because if we keep putting more plastic in the ocean, then we have the same problem for the next hundreds of years. So one level deeper, we can ask ourselves, what are the structures, the processes, the rules, the laws that make it possible for plastic to end up in the ocean? And there, for example, we see an industry who is putting a lot of emphasis on single-use plastics just because it's more profitable for them and easier to manage logistically. We see governments who are not deciding to rule against single-use plastic. In the EU, we're seeing some progress in other places around the world as well. But in general, worldwide, our governments are not taking a stand against single-use plastic. Why not? And at the deepest level, we can look at who benefits from all of this and who is making all of those decisions. So sure, it's governments, but it's also majorly very large companies, right? Multinationals like Pepsi and Coca-Cola. And if you want to have a bit of a laugh, there's an article by The Guardian that explains how these beverage companies came up with the concept of recycling, right? So how at some point internal meetings were had. And, in the past, all of these beverages used to be in reusable glass bottles that the companies were responsible to get back from the customer. And they figured there must be a cheaper and more effective way for them to do that and improve their bottom line in the process. And they came up with, let's use single-use plastics. And some people were worried, like, aren't the consumers going to complain that we just throw away things, right? Like the wastefulness that we see everywhere in our society now is a pretty recent invention. It didn't used to be like this. Even just 60 years ago, it wasn't like this. It's a recent invention. And so they came up with recycling as a way to make us feel a little bit less bad about just using a bottle once and then discarding it. So I'm not saying don't recycle, right? As long as we live in a world where there is plastic, of course, if we must use plastic, then for sure we should do our best to recycle it. But just to point out how sometimes the people who are very invested in the status quo get very creative about ways to make us compliant and complicit in systems that actually just benefit them and benefit the bottom line of a few people or a few companies. So when we talk about a paradigm shift, what is a paradigm shift in this context? It is, for example, to move from a linear economy to a circular economy. So it's not just introducing recycling and better recycling programs and getting to pay for your public transport with a bottle of plastic. All of those things are great, right? Are nice. I'm not saying we shouldn't do them, but they are not solving the issue at the core. They are just a way for us to fight the symptoms. So what we are looking at when we talk about systems change is really how do we shift the paradigm? how do we solve this at such a level of scale that everyone benefits? That, for example, there is no more single-use plastics, that this is just not a problem that exists anymore because we've solved it, for example, by transitioning to a circular economy.